So this session's mainly been run by David Cox, who is, you can follow on Twitter via the handle there, and myself, Imran Hussain, and you can follow me on Twitter as well. We're from Government Digital Service, which is technically part of the Cabinet Office. So yeah, as I said, we're recording this particular session. We're gonna transcribe it afterwards and share it, and it'll be uploaded to our YouTube channel afterwards. You can also get links to the slide deck and the HTML version of these slides, and I'm hoping my colleague Chris will be putting those into the chat as we kind of speak. Our plan for today. So to start off with, we're going to talk a little bit about what is WCAG and what is WCAG 2.2, and let you know a little bit about what's happening in this workshop series. So this is the first of a series, and you can find out a little bit more about that. Then we're going to go on to the nitty-gritty of this particular workshop, which is the focus not obscured criteria and how that has changed. We will demonstrate an example of how that's changed and what the new things are to do with the focus not obscured criteria. We're going to have some group activities to give you a chance to explore and implement and have a look at the criteria yourself and see if you can spot where it's relevant and not. We'll get back together as a bigger group and we'll kind of discuss what you found in the example that you were looking at. And right at the end, we'll have a bit of a wrap up and a retrospective on how you found the session. And your feedback is always really valuable, so we can make it better next time around. So all of the links and resources that we're going to use today can be found in our workshop Google Doc. And my colleague Chris is going to paste the link to that in the chat right now. So if you ever get lost and you need to find a link to something, this Google Doc will have it all in. So it's probably a good idea to have that open. And just to talk about our facilitators today, I think the key input is going to be via our accessibility specialist, David Cox. Say hi, David. You've got myself, I'm Imran Hussain. I'm a community designer, so I'm a lead on a lot of the community events. And we've got our fabulous interaction designer, Chris Ballantine-Thomas. And he's going to be kind of keeping an eye on the chat. And if you pop any questions into the chat or anything like that, he's going to make sure they get surfaced and share links and things like that during this session. So on to the first bit. What is WCAG? I'm going to hand over to my colleague David to take the reins.
So one of the first things we're going to look at is, okay, we're talking about accessibility, and one of the ways, at least in the UK government, we sort of measure accessibility is through something called WCAG, which is, oh, wrong way. Which stands for the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's important to note this is not the only way we look at accessibility. This is sort of one of the technical documents we use as guidelines to help us figure out if something is sort of meeting like the bare minimum for accessibility. And it's got some various different levels to it and various different what they call success criteria, which sort of describe ways that a website can be made to be more accessible. Just one second. There we go. Moving on. So of this standard WCAG, there is a new version coming out, version 2.2, to WCAG 2 Furious. I will be calling the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines during this workshop WCAG. So every time you hear that weird word, that's what it is. Apologies in the captions and the transcript. It's probably not going to come out properly, but that's sort of the quick way we say it. And essentially, WCAG 2.2 is an expansion pack. It's got more criteria to sort of look at. It rebalances some of the conformance levels, or at least it used to. I think they've changed that now. And it removes one of the old criterion, which has sort of become outdated because of the way that web browsers work. So that's, yeah, in a nutshell, what WCAG 2.2 is. And what we're interested in is that first part, the adding new criteria. So there are 9 potential new criteria coming with this new version of the accessibility guidelines. They are on the screen right now, and I'll just do a bit of a highlight to those. There's generally a few different categories. So there's ones that are called focused not obscured, and they come in a minimum and enhanced version. There's one for focused appearance, which has to do with the appearance of the sort of focus state in web. There's one for dragging movements. So anytime that there's sort of like interactions that involve dragging of a pointer input, so like a mouse or a stylus. There's target size, which is sort of like if you go to like select something, how big is the area you have? How big is that hit target to actually select it? There's consistent help, which I think is one of the easiest to explain. It's put help stuff consistently places. There's redundant entry, which is about like re-entering information and how that's done. And then the final one, and probably the one that a lot of teams are going to be working quite a bit on as they look at these new WCAG 2.2 criteria, is accessible authentication, which also comes in two flavors of minimum and enhanced. And that has to do with making the journey of sort of authenticating a user, which I'm currently writing up a question to the group that writes this about what exactly counts as authentication. But generally in that space, when you're authenticating someone or a user on the internet, how does that work and how is that made accessible or more accessible than it currently is at the very least? Yeah, so of those, the whole sort of package is currently sort of in review. It's what's known as a candidate recommendation, which is sort of like, here's all the stuff we're looking at changing, or what we're thinking of changing for WCAG 2.2. What do you think? And as of, I think, early this week, they've set sort of the expected publishing to be something around August or September, but there are delays known to happen, as it is sort of like a document that tries to build consensus and build sort of like a, yeah, that's good enough sort of agreement throughout the community. So that might end up being delayed if some major changes come up or there's some delays like that. But yeah, we're looking at about August or September of this year. As far as the UK government, we have a group called the Accessibility Monitoring Body, which is sort of a legal organism, which actually is one of our like co-teams, very close to our Gov.UK design system team here at the Government Digital Service. But they're going to start checking services and websites for those WCAG 2.2 sort of changes a year after the recommendation gets published. So you're looking at sometime in 2024 there. And our team is planning to update our Gov.UK design system code base, which is called Gov.UK frontend, as well as the guidance we publish on our website within sort of 6 months of WCAG 2.2 being published, to sort of give teams a bit of a head start on that, where you'll have at least 6 months with our interpretations and our fixes to get the core like design system baseline that we provide up to WCAG 2.2, and then that sort of 6 months to implement that and also figure out on top of that what things are needed for people's specific services. I will say, I guess this is on record, but I will say we're hoping to get it earlier than those 6 months, but that's sort of the goal we're reaching for, is 6 months. And this workshop series now, a little bit about this workshop series. So this came across, or this was developed for a few different reasons. The first reason this was developed is that some of the criteria coming in with WCAG 2.2, at least in a previous version, but it's still the case now, can be quite complicated to test for. It's hard to know like exactly how you're supposed to test for it. And there's a bunch of like edge cases that need to be sort of like figured out and parsed. So it takes some level of in-depth inspection. Also, service teams, at least in the UK government, are going to need to do more than just update to the latest version of the Gov.UK front-end sort of code base for the design system. There's some pieces, especially like consistent help and redundant entry, which you can't really code into a system from our side. It's more to do with like how the journey of a service is made. So yeah, we wanted to help prepare teams for the reality of sort of what's coming and put out the information on that. And then the third reason is we want to make sure that our updates we're doing as the Gov.UK design system are based on solid inspections and interpretations of these sort of new criteria in WCAG 2.2, especially the more like technical ones that you have to like do some calculations on. Because it's not going to be great for anyone if we're using a different method to measure what it means to meet WCAG 2.2. So yeah, this is sort of a chance for a bunch of different people to come together, feed into the work we're doing, and for us to feed into the work that service teams sort of across the UK government and across the private sector and other spaces as well are doing, so that we can ensure consistency and also double check if we're going in the wrong direction early now, rather than checking it like a month before that sort of compliance date comes in. So for this series, we're planning to do at least 3 criteria. That's sort of what we're aiming for. They're the ones that are a bit more like technical in nature, take a bit more inspection to figure out. So they are focused, not obscured. And we're specifically talking about the minimum version, but that includes both. Target size, and then one that used to be sort of something that would be legally required, but it's been bumped up to like the a different level called AAA, which is sort of like the gold standard, right? Yeah, which is actually what it's going to be called in WCAG 3, I think, but like the gold standard of like accessibility. But these are 3 that sort of take a bit more calculation and stuff. So we wanted to inspect them in particular. Yeah, and moving on. Today's workshop, we're going to be doing it as interactive. I think we said that on Eventbrite because we had done a previous workshop where we didn't specifically call out that it's interactive and people were a little surprised. So if you're in this room and you're surprised that it's interactive, apologies. But yes, there will be some level of like conversing with other people in the room. We're going to be doing breakout groups, stuff like that. So there will be the involvement of discussions, note-taking, hands-on inspection, like going into an actual like page URL and looking at it and sharing ideas. So it's not going to be too good if everyone is using, different method. Sorry, nope, I'm going to skip that. That was notes from earlier. Yeah, so let's get into it. We've talked about the fact that we're doing a workshop. It's based on a WCAG 2.2 criterion, which we've called focus not obscured minimum. What is that? I've got a nice set of slides from the accessibility monitoring team, which is sort of that government body that we'll go through first. And then I've got a simplified version, like a rule of thumb for you as well. And then I'll point you to the in-depth version of this as well. So we've got sort of like the overview really fast and then in-depth versions of this. And I'll try to go through it within the next 10 minutes. So sit tight and I'll say, please pay attention, but that's totally up to you. So focus not obscured, the minimum version is at AA, which means it's sort of the silver medal of doing accessibility when it comes to WCAG, where like this is stuff you really should be getting right because it affects a lot of people as they're navigating the internet through various assistive technologies. And in this case, especially through anything that uses like non-mouse navigation, so especially keyboard. Yes, so what is it? It's very similar to another criterion. Actually, it's not very similar. It's tied to another existing criterion that was already in WCAG 2.1 called focus visible, which basically says when you have like a focus on the web, it should be visible. And focus, as an example, is sort of like as if you tab through any sort of website, ideally it's some sort of indicator of the thing that you're currently tabbed to. It's a bit more complicated than that, but that's sort of the simple version of what focus is that we're talking about. But yeah, so it basically says focus not obscured, components must not be entirely hidden when it comes to them being focused. And the advanced version, the enhanced one, is no part of it, the focus can be hidden when it comes to something being focused. So they're very similar. It's just like the at least show a part of it versus show the whole thing. Yeah. So they have an example here about cookie banners as a good way to illustrate this. So we'll go to that. This is on the NHS government website. That's what we're showing right now. It's sort of like a screenshot. And at the top, you've got a sort of gray area popped above the top of the header for NHS. And it says, I'm okay with analytics cookies or do not use analytics cookies. So it's a cookie banner basically. And this example passes because the banner being used pushes all of the page content down rather than covering it up. So there's nothing really to obscure a focus, if that makes sense, because there's nothing that's overlapping. There's nothing covering anything else, at least nothing that is like accessible by keyboard or mouse interaction. But yeah, so moving the content down, great way to do that cookie banner. Good job to the NHS. We've got a second example here This is through another government website, I think. It's a very common cookie, what I'll call a flyout, which is sort of they're called modals. They're things that sort of sit on top of your website. And ideally, you can only navigate inside of them and it doesn't break out of the area. But yeah, they sort of fly out from the left side, and it's got a bunch of information about the cookies you're going to do. And this example passes because you can't tab or like move focus outside of this this overlay, this flyover modal. All of the focus always stays within the banner area. So this one's also good to go, even though it is covering up stuff underneath of it. And this one, we've got a third example here. This shows it's got like a footer that is covered up by another like flyover, like pop-up cookie banner coming from the bottom. But in this case, it would fail because it's not holding the focus inside of that area. So this is sort of designed to be a modal. It's dark and the stuff above it. It like has all the visual indicators of being a modal, but you can tab out into other sections, which is not great. But yeah, so it fails on focus not obscured because when the page is first loaded, the links are, you can navigate to them, you can focus on them, and they're behind the cookie banner, which visually covers them up. Yeah, so how, if you've got sort of this thing happening in a service or in one of your services, maybe, how do you pass it? So making sure that every user interface component is not entirely hidden when it receives keyboard focus is sort of the name of the game. And then ideally, making sure that the entire thing is visible when it receives focus. That's the enhanced version. Yeah, and then a note on this one is when we're talking about like whether it's hidden or not, it's only the initial position of components that counts. That's a little misleading, but basically what that means is, say you have what would be considered like a sticky thing. So like a little pop-up that says like, remember to floss your teeth on your page. And it does pop over other content and covers it up. If when it initially pops over, it's not disturbing any of the other content and there's no like focusable links underneath of it, but you can like move it around by either like clicking or dragging or some other method. The other places you can position it don't count basically. So if you can click and drag and move the thing around, that's okay. It's only the initial version of it that counts. And that was mainly done just for like simplicity of testing. Because at that point, if you have sort of like movable elements on a screen, in that way, not so much because of screen resolution, but just because of like you can physically move them around on the screen, it becomes very complicated. But yeah, so the AAA version of this is very straightforward. It's just that the components and their focus must not be obscured at all when it comes to focus. So that's what we had from the accessibility monitoring team, and sort of we agree with that. We're fully aligned on that with them. And then we made our own little quick check, which is basically if you go to a page, if you go to like, say your service or like some other web page and you want to know, is there something on this page that is related to focus not obscured? What do? It's quite brief, but basically you look for whether there's something that covers up focused content or if there's something that's quote unquote sticky. So sticky in like web development is sort of like something where if you start scrolling on a page, it'll at some point in that scrolling, it'll stay where it's on the page, and it doesn't really move from that area. But yeah, so if you've got sort of those two things happening, it doesn't mean you're definitely like failing focus not obscured on that website, but it's a really good indicator, a really good rule of thumb that, hey, this is a place where it's good to investigate. It's good to inspect and just make sure that it's not obscuring any focuses underneath of it. And now we'll go to the slightly more complicated one, the deep dive for focus not obscured. And I've got a few things for this. So this is sort of net new content that I've built for this workshop specifically. But basically, from what I can tell, there's 3 types of elements that may interact with focus not obscured. So getting into the very specific types of them. So there's when something is sticky. So when scrolling, it either moves to a spot and then like stops there and holds there, or it's just always in the same place on the screen, no matter how much you scroll, that sort of thing. And then the second one is modals. which is sort of like a type of web development thing. That's the one where ideally it sort of like covers up other content, and then it becomes the only thing you can click in within that area, usually used for what we'll say was used for in a second. And the third one is popovers, which are things that aren't necessarily like it takes up all the attention of the screen, but they're pieces of information or content that cover up other content. They pop over it. So for sticky elements, I've got a bunch of examples on screen. Some of the ones that are sort of the most common pieces where we get infractions, I suppose, are chatbots or web chats. So those little floating ones that say, how can I help you? Back to top buttons often will be made sticky. Cookies banners often will be made sticky as well, either to the top or the bottom of the page. And then there's sometimes things like sidebar navigation, where you've got like sort of like a table of contents on the side. And as you scroll through the page, it sort of stays stuck to that same place on desktop. And then for modal examples, we've got things like confirmation screens. We got warnings like, are you sure you want to do that thing? There's flyout menus, which are sort of that one that comes often from like the left or the right side, and sort of like blocks out all the rest of the content. There's cookie confirmation pages. We've already seen one of those. There's promotional materials like the little like in-page pop-ups being like, subscribe to our mailing list for 10% off. If that's sort of blocking out all the other content on the page, then that is a modal. And then the third one is popover. So this is stuff, once again, it goes over the content, but it's not really meant to block out the rest of it. So you've got stuff like mega menus, where sometimes on hover or on click, a bunch of menu items fall down over top of other content. You've got hover activated info. So say your pointer device, sort of like your mouse, goes over a box, and then more information pops up to one side of it. And then cookie confirmations, once again, and drop down content as well. It's important to note with all these, just because they exist doesn't mean they're failing. They can all be made in a way that passes focused, not obscured. And here's where it gets really in depth. If you want to know a lot more about focused, not obscured, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines have these things called understanding documents, which sort of try to explain the intent of why this was made in the first place, what it's intended to do, and other potentially helpful information, such as something called success techniques, which are like different methods that they've compiled that can help developers and teams to like meet these different criteria. I think if I click this, I don't know if it'll show up on my screen, but you can see, yeah, so for this one, it's got the success criterion at the top with a little note. And then this is sort of the extra in-depth information for it. It's got examples, got techniques, benefits, pieces like that. Important to note that since this is such a new success criterion in WCAG, this is still pretty much in draft. Like there's some of them that might get published that have pieces like this will be filled in later and stuff like that. So those might evolve over the next few months, hard to say, and they'll evolve after WCAG 2.2 is officially published as well. There's no real cadence of like versioning for these understanding documents. They're more just there to help, help give tips and tricks and stuff like that, and explain the intent of what this is supposed to do. We've got, but we're going to go into a demo now of doing this piece that I sort of hinted at, and is sort of the theme for the whole workshop, which is inspection. This is a made-up term made up by me for basically once you've determined that like, hey, there's probably something to do with focus not obscured on this page, or with this specific like element on a page. What comes next? How do you sort of explore that? How do you take your detective tools, take that understanding document of WCAG 2.2, and figure out sort of what specifically could be passing or failing, and what specifically to do about it. So I'll end this and I'll pull up my little set of demos, which is not that one, it's this one, haha. All right, let me know if you can't see my screen. You should be able to though. And I'm gonna just go, we're basically looking at a set of tabs now in an incognito Google Chrome window. We've got 4 to go through. The first 2 are sort of the main pieces of the demo. And just let me know if as I'm going through it, if there's anything visual that needs to be described a little bit more. I don't know how you can, I'll pull up the chat so I can see that. But yeah, we're gonna go through and I'll try to explain sort of everything that I'm going through with the demo. So up here on the screen, we've got a sample service we've been working with here at the Gov.UK design system team for quite a while on a new component we've been working on called Exit This Page. is sort of a emergency quick escape button to get outside of a website, or specifically a quick escape link, I suppose. And it's something we've been working on, developing, researching, doing a bunch of accessibility testing on for over a year now. We're getting very close to releasing. But I'm going to scroll the page now, and you'll see sort of why this is the example to pull from. So in the top right of the sort of page area, as I scroll, we've got this red exit this page rectangle that looks like a button. And once I scroll far enough, it actually sticks to the top of the screen. So it is sticky. That is sort of the definition right there. So the question came down, does focus not obscured interact with this? Is there any way that it could sort of cause issues? So I think I might get, okay, I'm gonna adjust my screen using the inspect instead of doing what I normally do. Lock this to the side. All right. So I've now, I'm going to squish the screen down, and as I squish it down, you'll see it goes from sort of being sticky at the top there, only once you scroll far enough, to being a much wider sort of button for exit this page that also becomes sticky on the top. And as I scroll, you might start to see sort of where the interaction happens that has us a little concerned with this. As I scroll down the page, eventually the exit this page goes over top of interactive elements. In this case, links are sort of being covered up by it. So this isn't necessarily a failure, but it's a place to start inspecting. And the first thing I'll do to inspect is sort of tab through. And I'll note, say we have someone with a screen size of, let's pick a fairly common one for some iPhone variants, 375 pixels wide. As they scroll through this, if this is sort of the prototype, if you have a screen of that size, that is, oh no. Okay, I don't know what happened, but we're good. You can tab through like this and you get the focus. But if I were to scroll so that, I'll align this right here like that. If I were to scroll backwards now, oh no, it fully refreshed. I am sorry. The fact that it broke made this a hard demo to give. So I'm going to stop sharing screen for a second and just fix it because unfortunately we've already fixed this and I tried to make a version that wasn't fixed. So talk amongst yourselves, or like sit amongst yourselves for a good second, and I'm going to fix this real quick. There we go. I love giving demos. I don't love giving demos that break, but that's part of what happens. All right, so you should be able to see my screen again, and we're going to try the exact same thing again, where say I was scrolled to this level and I tab backwards. Oh, where'd the focus go? For those who aren't looking visually at the screen, I'm tabbing back from one link to another, and suddenly it doesn't show anything visual on the screen. Again, like that. So this would be a failure of focus not obscured. And this is sort of where the quirk comes out, where in my mind, a failure of focus not obscured, the minimum version, is also almost always a failure of the enhanced version as well. Or the other way around. An enhanced version failure is also the same as a minimum for 99% of cases. So it did sort of make me question why you need the minimum and enhanced versions. I can see there are use cases where like the way a page is structured, there might be times where like you can always see a little bit of the focus. So I'll give an example. We have a link up here that's much bigger. It's 2 lines. Say that this was always a 2-line link, so it was bigger than that exit this page button. Then you could say like, oh, focus not obscured minimum is valuable. But since we work on a design system on our team, we can't predict what the content will actually be on the screen. So we have to sort of provide designs that work for every size of content. So links that are like 2 characters long, links that are 1 million characters long, we can't have that sort of like specificity. So for our case, we are basically always having to solve for focus not obscured enhanced, which is basically none of the focus area gets covered up. So the way we went about fixing this, getting it sort of so that it works, is with something called scroll padding. which is a fairly new piece of like CSS, HTML. I think it's CSS, yes. Which is like, it allows you to add sort of like an area, a buffer around something, so that if you're tabbing into it or doing any sort of scrolling, it will like avoid that area. So what we've done, and this isn't something I did, this is something our developer did, is at the top of the page here. So these first top 60 pixels of the page template, which kind of applies to the whole thing, there is what we call scroll padding on the top of 60 pixels, which means if anything sort of like scrolls or like tabs into that area, it'll be bumped to a different spot so it doesn't overlap. And what that does, it's kind of hard to demonstrate, but I'm gonna put the exit this page button over top of that get help if you have experienced domestic abuse link. And then when I tab back to it, it's going to jump the link so it's visible on the page and it's not hidden underneath the exit this page button. Bam. So it's jumped it to the middle of the page now. There's a few other ways to do this, all with these sort of like new standard pieces of CSS that unfortunately don't work in Internet Explorer. So we sort of flag this as it's an enhancement to do with Focus Not Obscured, but it doesn't fully solve it. The best way to solve this, which we didn't take, would be to not be using a sticky element over top of content. That was a piece where we decided for this specific implementation, it was more important for this safety feature to sort of always be on the page. So if this was a cookies banner, we probably would have just made it so it wasn't sticky. But since it was sort of a safety feature, we figured it's worth putting in the time and effort and development to have it there, even if there's a chance that it doesn't work perfectly on everything. So yes, that is sort of what we've done. And there's a few other ways scroll padding. So there's also something called scroll margin and a couple other things as well. So how do you focus on the exit this page button is a question I'm seeing. It's just a different place in the page. So if I scroll, where is it on this example? There we go. That's what it looks like visual on the screen. You get a focus on the exit this page button when that is in focus. Yeah, so it's just sort of sitting there in the page as well. Is that the margin bottom? I think that was a question about what scroll padding is. It's a separate thing from just regular padding and margins, specifically made for this sort of like making sure when you're scrolling, things don't cover up or overlap. So that's the end of that demo. I've just got two quick other ones as well, and then we'll sort of call it there. I'll note though, the way I found like that this was happening, I'll go and I'm using the inspect tool in Google Chrome. So inspecting the button, that's not actually where it's going in this example that we've done. We've put it on the template for the whole page because we know that this is something that is at the top is where it's getting sticky. So we have scroll padding at the top of the page of 60 pixels. That's sort of how this is implemented. Once again, this is the way we've done it for this specific implementation. If this was something at the bottom, we would be using scroll pad on bottom for the whole page. And there are other sort of techniques to do this as well. But that was the one that got us around, like when you tab to something, if it's underneath of this like 60 pixels, or if it's within these 60 pixels of the top of the page, it'll sort of rearrange the scroll so that it's not getting covered up. Yeah, and that's one of the techniques that WCAG is sort of recommending for people. Another example of an element that might interact is back to top buttons. So we've got one here on our GOV.UK design system website. And I want to highlight this one specifically because yes, it is sticky. As I'm scrolling, you can see it's not moving, but it's placed in an area where it actually doesn't get a chance to overlap any interactive content ever, basically, because it only shows up once you scroll down far enough that these interactive links for the side menu are out of range. And it's in a place, I'll resize the screen now, where you can see it doesn't actually ever touch the main content either. And once you get down to mobile size, instead of being sticky anywhere on this area, which is when it would start becoming an issue with Focus Not Obscured, it's just sort of placed within the content at the bottom there. So if that was sticky, we might have to do a couple like tricks with scroll padding and stuff like that. But in the way it's currently designed, no interactions with Focus Not Obscured, despite being sticky. And here we've got, once again, a cookie banner example. We've already gone over this, so I won't do too much. But you can see instead of being sticky at the top or anything like that, or being a popover where it comes over top of stuff but doesn't change the way that you like focus, it's actually just like fully push down all the content on the page. So you've got this cookies area, and then it doesn't cover up any content. And then you've got the main Gov.UK. And they do the same with Gov.UK in the menu as well. If you click this, it actually pushes all the content down rather than being the mega menu sort of idea of like popping over or being a flyout sort of modal style from the left or right. So this, once again, no interactions with focus not obscured. The search, once again, opens there. This is, I think, the last one I'll show is we have a search here that has this auto complete feature. So if I type, there's these things that do sort of pop over. This is popping over the content with the different suggestions for what you can do for search. But you can't actually keep this open and then start focusing on other stuff. It closes immediately. So it also passes focus not obscured because you can't focus on other elements and have it open popping over at the same time. That is the end of my demo. So I'm going to take a quick second to go back to the slides. All right. Some of this has already been covered, but I'll just go through a couple types of fixes that are available. So I think I've got position sticky. I think that's wrong. That's like pseudocode. So apologies for that. But when you've got sticky elements, start looking at that scroll padding, scroll margin. The WCAG sort of understanding document doesn't actually suggest scroll padding. It suggests using CSS margin and scroll margin, which we haven't tried ourselves, but I'm assuming scroll margin is very similar to scroll padding. Just being padding versus margin. Other fixes are just don't use sticky elements if you don't need it. And if there's not like a good user need for it or a good like usability case for it, consider not making sticky elements because they can overlap other content, or place sticky elements in areas where no page content exists. So that was the sort of piece with that back to top button where it never exists in a place where it could overlap other content. For flyout menus and modals, those other two, another type of fix is making sure that the tabbing and focus stays inside the modal or the flyout with a method to close and dismiss that. Usually escape button or escape key is a way to close it. Usually there's like a close button, often in like the top right of the modal, but some way to close that out and get back to the regular tabbing. Other fixes for the pop over content is just avoid using popovers, especially if they're activated by hover actions, because those can be hard to use on other devices and with assistive technologies. And then the other piece is like only keep the popover open when the focus is inside of that. So close it when the focus moves away. So that's what we saw with that search autocomplete, where the popover effect, where it covers up other content, only happens when it's in focus. And as soon as you move focus away, it closes. And that's the end of sort of the training. And at the exact halfway mark, we're moving on to today's workshop breakout activity. First of all, to say thank you to everyone for going through with this workshop piece. I know there was a bunch of people that sort of ran out of the room as soon as we said interactive. But yes, we were very excited to make this sort of like a hands-on experience as well, because I think especially with Focus Not Obscured, what we sort of experience on our side is it's all fun and games to like talk about what it is or what like how to spot it. But once you actually get into a website that has some examples of it, like it just helps build the mental models a lot better. And it's a lot easier, at least for our team, to like understand what's going on when you actually have like a physical example for this one. So we really want to do, a workshop style. So thank you for participating in that. We've got a couple of resources for you here, and then I think we'll sort of end with like one or two questions and what we do like a retrospective on the day, which will come from Imran. So there is this page about WCAG 2.2 in general, which is a good resource. It's called What's New in WCAG 2.2. It's currently in draft, so they update it a couple times every month or so. And then there's also, if you're just looking for more information about like sticky elements in general, there's this blog, I think it's from 2018, from someone sort of, yes, Andy Selleck, that's who it is, a coworker. So that's a pretty good resource as well, just to learn about some of their research with sticky elements in general, and when to use them and when not to use them. I think they ended up not using a sticky element. in that case. And then there's also, if you're interested in the work we're doing specifically as the Gov.UK design system team right now on Focused Not Obscured, there's 4 GitHub tickets from our repositories where you can actually see us arguing about it. Not arguing, discussing civilly and trying to come up with solutions. So yeah, I figured these were of interest to some people who want to go a little more in depth and sort of see the work we're doing right now. And that's sort of all the resources I had other than the stuff we've already shown. So I don't know if we have time for a couple more questions. I'll leave that to Imran.
Thank you for everyone who made it right till the end, and just generally for taking part in this discussion. We hope you found it useful. I will send that retro link around via email afterwards. If you could take 2 minutes, it's going to be a really short one, to just give us your feedback, that would be extremely helpful. Once again, thank you for your time. Hoping to have the next one out maybe in about a month's time, so it's not too much of a gap. But apart from that, have a great afternoon. Thank you for attending. Hope to see you at the next one, everyone.